product provided by Nintendo for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Switch 2 Edition is coming out soon. Not only are we going to get 4K 60 FPS, but we're also getting a new blade. And with a new blade comes new story. So who is this blade going to be? We have a lot of candidates, people, so let's see if we can narrow it down any. Hello, everybody. It's your boy Jmulls. And who's that blade?
I know what you're thinking.
There are two, okay, kind of three candidates that I think are the most likely picks for the new blade to be added to Xenoblade 2. The first being somebody entirely new. They're not from another Xeno game. They're not a reference to anybody, just a completely new original character that wouldn't really be outside the realm of possibility for Xenoblade 2's blade system. I think it's a pretty safe bet. Makes sense why they wouldn't be advertising the character specifically right now, because if we had the identity, it just wouldn't be really hype, but right now, they are viewed as a value proposition for the Switch 2 edition. And it also keeps a bit of surprise going. I think it's a very safe bet. Not the most exciting, but it's a very safe bet. Number dos is a character from Xenoblade Genesis. Now hear me out. I think this one makes a lot of sense. And there's a few reasons for this. Xenoblade 2 has utilized characters from other Xenoblade games as blades added to Xenoblade 2, like Shulk and Melia and also Elma. Heck, we can even go back to Xenosaga with the characters of kos-mos and Telos. So having a character from a different Xenoblade game in Xenoblade 2 and just make them a blade for the purposes of gameplay and some loose story connection, sure, that can happen. They kind of play it a little bit loosey-goosey when it comes to this stuff. But I also think it just makes a lot of sense from a business perspective. What do I mean by this? Xenoblade 2 is the best-selling Xenoblade game, and by that logic, it makes sense that most people will be excited for a Switch 2 edition of Xenoblade 2, simply because the people that have played this game are larger in number than all the other games. And since the player base of 2 doesn't entirely convert over to Xenoblade 1, 3, or X Definitive Edition, again, just based on sales figures, it can get Xenoblade 2 onlys introduced to a character from the next game, get them invested, and hope to convert them into a sale for Xenoblade Genesis. On top of this, you can possibly lay some intrigue and mystery surrounding the character of who I imagine would be Eleanor, because Eleanor is going to be the MC of Genesis, so if you're going to introduce a character from Genesis and put it into Xenoblade 2, I feel like Eleanor is the pick. You can get people invested with your new main character. Like, as a business, you would want as much marketing for Genesis as is feasible. And since a Switch 2 edition of Xenoblade 2 is probably going to be the hypest moment for this franchise until we get even more Xenoblade Genesis trailers, it just makes a lot of sense to me. Especially after what probably were underwhelming numbers for X Definitive Edition, so you would probably want to, like, change up your marketing strategy a little bit here. This makes a lot of sense to me. And like I've talked about before, any lore issue that could prevent this from happening has kind of already been addressed in Xenoblade 2. Yeah, Xenoblade 2 has kos-mos and Telos, and while they kind of skirted around that issue by saying it's not the exact same kos-mos and Telos, it goes to show one way they could implement a character from Xenoblade Genesis and not really run into any lore issues. That, and I'm not entirely sure they particularly care about that. They could always just say the blade is not necessarily canonical and just kind of there for fun. But then also we have Shulk and also just Fiora here. If they want to write around some kind of issue with implementing a character from another Xenoblade game, they can do that. And also, as a reminder, Elma's just here and she's from a whole different universe. It's like that one episode of SpongeBob when they're trying to find a way to clean the $1 bill. We have the technology.
I know what you're thinking.
The third option of the bracket of characters that I think are more likely than others, a character from Xenoblade 3. We have a few options here. Now, why would they do this? Well, Xenoblade Genesis isn't out yet. If they want to keep everything under wraps for the release of Xenoblade Genesis for whatever reason, then they might say, well, we're introducing a new blade into Xenoblade 2 for the Switch 2 edition and a new hero into Xenoblade 3 for the Switch 2 edition. Why not implement a character from 3 into 2 and a character from 2 into 3? Could also possibly serve as a mechanism to get people excited to try out Xenoblade 3 Switch 2 edition in the lead up to Genesis. Going back to the whole conversation we just had about Xenoblade 2 having the best sales figures. So who do I think is likely? Well, obviously, like Noah and Mia, right? I feel like of the Xenoblade 3 characters, they are the most likely to be picked. Noah, because you could argue he's kind of the face of Xenoblade 3, and also Mio because, well, she's Nia's daughter, and you'd probably play on that when it comes to the blade quest you would inevitably get in Xenoblade 2. I highly doubt it'd be one of the other four, like Tyon, Senna, Lance, or Uni, just because I feel like if you're going to pick a character for the main party of Xenoblade 3, it would either be Noah or Mio. They're the obvious pick. They're not the only ones, though. This guy right here, going back to what we just talked about for Xenoblade 2, when it comes to implementing a new character, you don't have to abide by the rules here. With the blade system and whatever lore justification they want to conjure up, you don't have to abide by the rules here. If you want to just throw in some timey-wimey shenanigans going on and just have Chadosaurus Rex over here implemented into Xenoblade 2,
leave it to Uncle Rex.
and for him to meet his younger self and have a whole blade quest dealing with all of that. One, I think that would generate quite a bit of hype. I think that'd be really dang cool. And I think it's safe to say that Chadosaurus Rex over here got quite a bit of hype and attention when it came to Future Redeemed. You could argue maybe adult Shulk as well. We already have regular Shulk in Xenoblade 2. I really don't think we need this version of him. Again, if you're going to pick between this Shulk and this Rex, I feel like for Xenoblade 2 Switch 2 Edition, you just pick Rex. You could also just pick one of the other heroes, like maybe Ethel or something like that. They're definitely somebody to consider. I just don't think they're as likely as either Noah, Mio, or Chadosaurus Rex over here.
I know what you're thinking.
There are two other characters from Blade 3 that I think you could make an argument for, and they actually come from Future Redeemed. Glimmer and A, or maybe even Alpha. Glimmer could be an interesting pick for very similar reasons why you could possibly go with like Chadosaurus Rex from Future Redeemed. You could probably have a rather interesting Blade quest involving Rex's kid, and basically just meeting a different version of her father, and also mother. Do I think it's particularly likely they'll pick someone like Glimmer or even Chadosaurus Rex? It really does depend upon what they want out of this new Blade. But when it comes to someone like A, Alvis even, or Alpha, that would be a rather interesting pick to me because that would complete the Trinity core processor for Xenoblade 2. Logos from Malos, we have Numa, and then we could finally have some Ontos representation in Xenoblade 2. And you could really do a Blade story involving the Trinity core processor probably, and expanding on that, possibly in the lead up to Xenoblade Genesis. I think that could be a rather interesting pick. Though I would argue that if we're going to pick a member of the Trinity core processor to have as a new Blade for Xenoblade 2, I would personally want to see Malos or Logos. Would it make sense in the lore? Absolutely not. Do not get me wrong. However, I've wanted Metsu Blade for the longest time possible, and I don't think I'm ever going to get a new game plus optional mode where you just swap the roles of Numa and Logos in the story of Xenoblade 2, and I don't think I'm ever going to get my bro adventure with Rex and Malos. I don't think that's ever going to happen. This would probably be the closest thing I could possibly get to that. Malos is obviously one that's being talked about quite a bit because it would be really dang cool. Dude's already playable in Xenoblade 2, especially in the early section where you can just play as him. I would be glued to my seat for his Blade quest and whatever that would entail. You could maybe just say, what if we ignore the lore contradictions and like when in the timeline would Rex actually acquire the Logos core crystal for Malos? So like after we defeat Malos, we're trying to get out of the world tree and all that, so when would we actually acquire him? We could maybe just kind of ignore that bit. There's quite a few that would get me hyped. The one that would arguably make me more satisfied just to see announced more than anything would probably be Malos, even if it feels more like a pipe dream than something that's actually likely to happen. I mean, we already had Poppy Buster, so like maybe we could do another Poppy form or something like that. Sure, maybe you could argue be a little bit predictable, but I also think there is still quite a bit of interesting story you could tell in the form of a Blade quest when it comes to a new Poppy form, maybe. I don't think it would be like restricted to Tora, probably more along the lines of Poppy Buster herself, just actually good this time. Heck, if we wanted something really out there, we can maybe like make a regular Blade form of Gramps. That feels way more fanficky than anything, but like it's possible they could do something like that just for the purposes of a Blade quest, and for like a final DLC Blade of Xenoblade 2, if you want to qualify it as DLC, which I mean, I guess it kind of is. And in a very similar vein to like Malos and the conversation we just had for why or why not they might pick that character, you could also say for Jin. Again, when in the timeline would this actually be? Because the dude is dead at the end of his encounter with a Malthus at the end of the game, so what would we do there? Do we retcon it and say, oh, actually, he's not really dead, the core crystal somehow got out of it, or like, we found a way to rejuvenate a core crystal from a shard of a core crystal, huzzah. It would be really cool to see. I don't think that's going to be the pick they go for. I think they could find a way to hand wave over the lore restrictions that would be in place to prevent them from picking someone like like Jin, they could hand wave those things away. I don't know if they necessarily want to, though, for a character like Jin. We could also just go back to Xenoblade 1 or even go back to Xenoblade 3 and just pick someone like Melia. In some ways, you could argue Melia would be a safe pick. I mean, you've already got Shulk in Xenoblade 2. Why not also bring in the Bird Girl? I don't think it's particularly likely compared to some of the other options we've talked about, but it is something to consider. But there is one more that I really want to talk about, and it will require us to go back to Xenoblade X. And I think there's only one question I need to ask in lead up to this character. How's it poppin'?
Thinking about it now?
The pizza fanatic himself from Xenoblade X would be a very interesting pick here. Al the hero, or at least the hero before us. Is he the only Xenoblade X character that we have to talk about right now? No, but I think he's the most interesting one to talk about. Any possible lore issue that you could conjure up as to preventing Al from joining Xenoblade 2 just kind of goes out the window because, well, we already had Elma. And also besides that, there's a perfectly good moment in the story of X that you could just say Al hopped on over to Xenoblade 2 for a bit. Yes, I'm talking about the time he was in the rift between worlds. Like, it just works in so many ways. Oh, but why didn't Al talk about his time in Xenoblade 2 in X Definitive Edition Chapter 13? Well, you could argue the same with, like, Elma here. You could just say that they don't remember their time in Xenoblade 2 when they come back to Mir or whatever. Or just kind of ignore it because is it really that big of a deal when you think about it? Like I said, there are ways to either ignore the problems or just get around them. And I think there's a lot of interesting things that you could do if you add Al into Xenoblade 2, particularly when it comes to interactions with Elma, because like I said and keep repeating, Elma is in Xenoblade 2. She also doesn't come from the gacha system, so I think there's a perfectly good opportunity there to have even more moments and interactions between Elma and Al than we already got in Chapter 13, and you just have them in Xenoblade 2 for whatever reason. As a big fan of both of these characters, I would personally love to see that. Now, there are two other characters from Xenoblade X that I think would be really interesting picks. Well, three. You could technically add Lyn if you want. I mean, I like Lyn, that'd be cool to add, but I feel like there are two others that have more interesting possibilities when you expand on their stories. The cosmo-archaeologist Neil Nail. She was a new party member added with X Definitive Edition, and with her job being cosmo-archaeologist, she could possibly give us a lot of interesting perspective, not just on her people the Clue, or even ancient Samar, but also just the world of Alrest, or Lost Jerusalem if you really want to get into it. She could just be a really interesting addition to Xenoblade 2 just to expand on the backstory and just the world overall. The other character I want to talk about is somebody we talked about relatively recently because it feels like a conspiracy theory. They could be setting up a character like El Saruf over here to have a larger role in the narrative going forward, especially if there is meat on the bones of that story theory that we've talked about this dude actually trying to be a representation of Lucifer despite the goofy dance he's doing right now. Almost perfect timing when it comes to that, huh? Bro, what kind of face was that? I'm trying to hype him up and he's doing stuff like that. To me, if they pick somebody like L of all the characters in Xenoblade X to add into Xenoblade 2, that signals to me there is something larger going on with this character, who is always just kind of there in the story of X. He doesn't really play a big role. He's weird, he's unique, he's also just kind of there. Maybe he's foreshadowing or just laying the groundwork for something to be expanded on in the future, or he's actually just kind of nothing. Do I think it's likely they'll pick him? No, but if they do, that signals to me, hey, there's gonna be way more meat on this bone of a story for the future here. And maybe we'll have to keep an eye on that theory about El Saruf trying to be a representation of Lucifer or whatnot. It gets particularly interesting when you go look at the concept art, as we talked about in a previous video, by the way, just want to point that out. Also kind of makes sense why you would keep him under wraps and not really advertise him in the lead up to the Switch 2 edition of Xenoblade 2, because come on, let's be fair here, how much hype would there actually be if they just added this dude? But as a surprise, yeah, I think that could work very well. They could do something absolutely crazy. And the final pick that I would actually want to talk about, what if they pick Cross, the main character, your player character from Xenoblade X? Maybe they could do something like loading your save data from Xenoblade X Definitive Edition, and they'll copy over your character. Would you give him a voice? Could you maybe make him being silent a bit in Xenoblade 2? I don't think it's particularly likely. I'd be kind of excited for that, be pretty dang cool. Don't think it's likely, but I do think it's worth at least bringing bringing up here. And I feel like it's not that likely simply because the other characters we've talked about for Xenoblade X, I feel like you can just do more with them if you add them into the Xenoblade 2. That's not to say you can't do anything with the character across. Sure, you could, but I just feel like there's more actionable story that you could tell and really unravel in Xenoblade 2 with the Blade Quest if you pick somebody like an Al or a Neil Nail or even an El Saruf. Who knows, maybe they pick Tatsu and we begin our world domination of Tatsu all over the globe. Yes, dance for me, you little potato, dance for me. Alright, Tatsu, I see where you've placed yourself in regards to Elma, by the way. Yeah, I see you over there.
I know what you're thinking.
Who will be the new character added to Xenoblade 2? Only time will tell, and knowing my luck, maybe they'll announce it the day after I upload this video. Or maybe we're not going to find out until we actually log into the game when the Switch 2 edition drops. But you know, the day that Switch 2 edition comes out for Xenoblade 2, I'm going to be in there like swimwear. I'm going to be in there like a hump on a camel, or a camel on a hump. I've heard it both ways. But here's where you come in. Leave a comment down below with who you think or who you want to be added as the new Blade in Xenoblade 2, or even the new hero for Xenoblade 3. I would love to hear your thoughts, hear your theories, and to hear your predictions. And while you're down there, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. And I'm working on an update to the Fallen God theory of Xenoblade Genesis. We talked about a whole host of candidates, people, and if you want to be prepared for when we talk about the final possible candidate in my eyes for the Fallen God of Xenoblade Genesis and the vengeance we may have to endure, well, you should check out this video right here. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, have a great day, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody. Until we meet again!